Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 11th virtual event of the 6th Unbound Book Festival. My name is Fong Nguyen, and I'm a member of the planning committee for Unbound. This event is The Art of the Sentence, featuring the extraordinarily talented fiction writers Rian Amilcar Scott and Anjali Sethdeva, and you are in for a fabulous evening. As you may know, the festival has always been completely free to attend, and this wouldn't be possible without the generosity of the hundreds and hundreds of people who have supported us financially over the years. On behalf of everyone who volunteers for Unbound and everyone who attends these events, we are so grateful to each and every one of you who has been kind enough to give. A list of everyone who has given over the past 2 years is on the website, and if you'd like to contribute yourself, you can do so by going to the website and clicking on the donate button. We're a registered nonprofit, and we are completely run by volunteers, so everything we receive goes directly into putting on these events. Thank you. Support comes too from the City of Columbia, specifically the Office of Cultural Affairs and the Convention and Visitors Bureau. KBIA and Como Magazine are our media sponsors. A full list of sponsors and supporters is available on the website. Particular thanks this evening to tonight's event sponsor, Skylark Bookshop in Columbia, Missouri. We're very grateful to them for their support over the years. Tonight, one person who asks our featured speakers a question will receive a copy of Rian's story collection and Anjali's story collection, courtesy of Skylark Bookshop. So if you have any questions for them as the event proceeds, please type them into the comments, and the moderator will ask them at the end of the event. Then at the end of the Q&A, I will announce the winner. Please remember that if you miss an event, everything is available for viewing or reviewing on both our Facebook page and on YouTube. If you haven't already, please do take a moment to review the whole schedule, all 3 months of it, on our website and plan to attend as many events as you like. While you're there, you can also sign up for the festival newsletter, which goes out on Monday mornings and will keep you up to date with what to expect each week. And please tell your friends about the festival. Now please welcome Scott Garson, editor of Wigleaf, who will be moderating this panel.
Thanks, Fong, and hello, everyone. It is possible to watch a film, a movie, and think, man, in a way, a fiction writer has to do all this stuff, everything, all by themselves. And a fiction writer has only one medium in which to do it all. The performance, the film editing, the lighting design, set design, casting, screenplay. A fiction writer's medium is, of course, words. And words are effective. Words can convey character, setting, all that. But also, by way of their particular combinations and arrangements, words can do more. Words can give something further, many things further, perhaps. This is what we're here to discuss tonight. I'm excited. Let me welcome our two authors, Anjali Sethdeva and Rian Amilcar Scott.
Hi.
Hey, folks.
Hey. So we have decided to start with some brief readings, one from each of you guys' terrific collections of stories which have come out recently. I'm going to give some bio stuff as a lead-in. We're going to start here. See if I can get it there. Anjali Sethdeva is a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop. Her fiction has appeared in the Iowa Review, Gulf Coast, Yale Review, and others. Her debut collection of stories, All the Names They Used for God, was named a Best Book of the Year by NPR, Refinery 29, and Book Riot. And it won the 2019 Chautauqua Prize. Roxane Gay called it one of the best collections I've ever read. Anjali.
Hi, nice to meet you all. I'm going to read briefly from, oh, this is so hard to get it on the screen. There we go. From one of the stories from the collection, which is called Killer of Kings. And I'm just going to read from the beginning of the story. I will say I chose this one because it is the one where I like the sentences the best of maybe anything that I've ever written. But I have learned over time that even though I like it the best on the page, it's not quite the same when you hear it out loud. So I think part of what's interesting to me is that difference between what makes a great sentence on the page and what makes a great sentence for reading aloud. But I'm going to give it my best effort and start just from the beginning of the story here. Killer of Kings. The angel sits at John's bedside, a quill in her hand that may well be one of her own feathers. She raps the nib against the sheet and says, "John, John, John," in that sing-song, mocking way of hers, her perfect shoulders drooping. He's boring her. He sits up straighter against the pillows and tries to think, pressing his trembling fingertips to his temples, but inside his head is only a blank, hissing whiteness like a field of shifting snow. "Imperfect," she says, "impious, imperiled, impressive?" Her voice has the low resonance of a cat's purr, so that he often feels it vibrating in his jaw. "No," John says, "none of those. But what the right word is, he just can't remember. It slips his grasp, like so many things these days." The rate at which his body has betrayed him is shocking, and in moments like this, he feels his age settle on him like a cloak of lead. "John," she says, "we will be here all century at this rate. Tell me something, or the old so-and-so will be wroth with us both." "Imprudent," he says, and she nods and moves the quill fluidly across the paper, but returns all too quickly to her posture of waiting, her anticipatory silence. John knows he should be glad to see the angel. He has been blind for 6 years and should be glad to see anything, much less a messenger from heaven. But she frightens him. Bitter white light seeps from her skin, and she has a faint scent about her like crushed granite and ice. There are times when he wishes he could close his eyes against her and return to the velvet darkness of his blindness. The first time she appeared to him, John woke from a dream of dark and glassy seas and found the angel sitting in a straight-back chair by his bedside. Without preamble, she said, "I've come for your poem." "Which one?" "Oh, you know, the epic," she said, waving her fingers airily. "Fall of man, redemption, forgiveness, etc. Your great work." "I haven't written it." "I am well aware." A quill appeared in her hand and a board across her lap with a sheet of parchment and an ink pot. She smiled at him as she dipped the pen into the ink. "Let's begin." Now she looks at him with much less patience. "Something more, John," she says. "Epics are not made in a day, and for all you know, you will be dead tomorrow." "I will not be dead tomorrow," says John, "else you would not be here with me." But his conviction does not go further than his voice, and both of them know it. It is centuries now since the angel began her work with humans, and being close to them has invoked her curiosity, if not her admiration. They are just so many stories patched together, so many forgotten days encased in bone and meat. One might unearth almost anything with enough searching. Being a muse is mostly this, a sifting through of memories to find something of merit, hauling it to the surface where it can shine. The endeavor has, at the best of times, an exotic appeal. Forgetting is a concept the angel knows only through observation. Every moment of her long existence echoes through her like the unfading peal of a bell, things she would rather forget every bit as loud as those she would remember. And I will stop there. Thank you.
All right. We're going to do Rhiann's reading next. Rhiann Amilcar Scott's first book, Insurrections, won the Penn Robert W. Bingham Prize for debut fiction. His work has appeared in The New Yorker, The Kenyon Review, Confrontation, and others. He teaches creative writing at the University of Maryland. NPR's Michael Schaub calls his new collection of stories, The World Does Not Require You, one of the most inventive books of the year and one of the best.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for that reading. My favorite part was the light coming off the angel's skin. So I'm gonna read from a story from my book, The World Doesn't Require You, called the Temple of Practical Arts. And I also picked this one because I think I was on it when it came to the sentences. All right. This is before they burned the temple, transforming both apprentices and masters into aimless ramblers. We became beautiful then. Through music, through the land, we were shapers of the world's destiny, or at least we were training to be. After the temple, we became beggars, wanderers, hustlers, street buskers, pitied by passers-by and harassed by police, half-formed angels cast from heaven. We became the stuff of nightmares. None of us, it turns out, were actually the luminous demigods we'd seen gazing from our mirrors. I played piano in a bar for a time. Some left music altogether. Our lives came to no consequence. We called a man the deity and followed him as if he were one, as if such a thing as a deity actually exists somewhere out there. One of my schemes right after the fire, but before the piano bar, was to form a band called The Begotten to play covers of the deity's music. That one fizzled quick. The kid ruined this place, the temple. He ruined us, transformed us all from little symphonies into the faded plucks beneath the bleeding fingers of God, the spent guitarist, the last thumps in the dying heart of God. Dave the deity lived in a huge old wooden farmhouse just on the edge of Cross River, on the far side of the wildlands. This was the temple. The place existed in a kind of forbidden zone they called the ruins, a succession of abandoned plantations, many taken over by squatters claiming divine right to save the soul of the land. The temple was just one of those soiled and haunted carcasses, a monument to man's cruelty rehabilitated by our presence. We weren't just living, we were cleaning an ugly, foul-smelling stain, and that was our mission, the ultimate purpose of our existence. And this existence of ours took on an unreal quality. At night, you could still see the stars and the luminous clouds behind the stars. The sky appeared ornate and beautiful, as if someone had painted it. Goats and cows and dogs roamed the grounds, as did roosters who possessed a poor sense of time and crowed at all hours. All of us, the deity's students, admired him, loved him even, and we hoped to make that love reciprocal. We kept the place going by working from morning to night, and in exchange, the masters taught us all they knew of music. And at all times of day and night, you could hear notes so beautiful, if you close your eyes, you'd see the bare curves of a woman. That's what I saw, at least. Others, I suppose, saw something different. Whatever your ideal, you'd see it. Of course, at all hours, someone was hitting notes so sour they could turn your stomach, and oftentimes they did. In addition to music, as if a compliment to the notes, you'd often hear the huffing of physical activity. Stay fit, our teachers preach. Master your breaths, then your music, then yourself. We jogged and trained in the art of slapsmithing to stay lean and upright. And in our spare time, we squeezed out notes, hoping our music would please the masters. Only flabby sounds can come from flabby people, Grandmaster Deity taught, and we believed it. We understood the slapping movement of slapboxing, our forms, this aggression, this pantomime of violence is tied intimately to our beloved river beat. And so we dressed in our brown robes, we sparred and we practiced. Each note, each movement, a piece of the steady march toward becoming something like beings of light. This life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. In a band, I had a band, rice at every meal, a secondhand guitar gifted to me by the masters after I completed trials in both slapsmithing and music. I wanted for little. My only need, to stand as I did, not in perfection, not in mastery, nor even in competence, but in constant work and growth. To be honest with you, my band and I, we sounded like shit. And despite my deep affection for them, the sight of them often broke my face, turning it into a rage mask. It was the universal sound that bonded us and nothing else. We weren't friends, but we were about that work. We were there to learn, there to conquer the minor trials and the major one on the horizon that stood in the way of us joining the teachers in mastery. The music was everywhere in the air. The music was everywhere in the air at the time, and we let the notes, both sour and sweet, pass over us like dandelion snow. Thank you.
Awesome.
That was amazing.
Thank you.
My first two questions are for you individually and sort of pertain to your particular collections. After that, we'll sort of widen out and ask questions that you both can jump in on. So for Anjali first, you take us in such an interesting variety of directions in your stories, different eras, different genres, different places on the map. Even in those stories that are basically realist, for example, The World by Night, Glass Lung, and the unforgettable title story, All the Names They Use for God, you make a place for what I want to call magic, which is maybe just mystery, a sense that in these worlds we recognize things can happen which maybe we don't.
Yeah.
What I'm wondering, I've got to the question now, I wonder how you think of your prose, or if you think of your prose in relation to that aspect of your work, how it can conjure, how it can move us to the edge of known boundaries.
Yeah, I mean, so on the sentence level, I don't think this is something you necessarily want the reader to be conscious of as they're reading the piece. But often when I am reading something, you know, the thing that will really wow me is a turn of phrase that allows me to picture a mundane thing in a fresh way. So it's, you know, we're always, when I'm teaching writing, we're always exhorting our students not to use cliches. And really the opposite of that is something that some comparison, personification, whatever it is, that I suddenly am looking at a cell phone or a doorknob or whatever it is and seeing it as some totally new thing because of the way the writer has described it. So yes, I certainly strive to do that wherever I can. I'm not going to say I hit it 100% of the time, but that's something I am trying to bring in there.
Next, Rion's exclusive question. So Rion, I'll wait till I get him back up here. There you are. Your fictional world, Cross River, Maryland, has come to have a very real place in my mind, and I'm certain a lot of other readers feel the same. A number of the Cross River stories in this new collection, including the one you just read from, concern music as an art, as a discipline, as a pursuit. There's also, in addition to Temple of Practical Arts, Slim in Hell, which has a recurring character, and then the opening story, David Sherman, Last Son of God. So I wanted to read a few sentences from that particular story, the David Sherman story. Cross River had a rhythm. The river had a beat to it. That much was clear. He didn't feel it in Port Yuga. And if he presented it right, no one could tell him it was noise. It'd take time to learn to recreate that sound. So, Cross River Sound. Is it possible to write stories about Cross River and the Cross River Sound without thinking of the prose itself in its rhythms, in its fascinating mix of tonalities, as sort of exemplifying that sound? I'm wondering if you have any thoughts in that direction.
Yeah, I think it wouldn't be that far off to think of David Sherman's quest as you know, similar to my quest and the writer's quest of finding an authentic language to express these, you know, these things with, you know, that there really aren't any words for, you know. And you know, and that's how I think of writing. You know, just trying to, you know, a lot of times it's first, you know, it doesn't necessarily start with the words. It starts with the rhythm, and then you put the words to the rhythm. And then sometimes it starts with the words, and you have to shape the words into the proper rhythm. And so, you know, I think you know, the highest form of writing is being a musician on the page.
Yeah. I was worried somebody else would have asked you that question. Like you would have had it 2 or 3 times already and be like, oh no, not that one again.
No, it's the first time I've been asked that question. I appreciated it. You know,
that's good.
Made me think. One thing I want to say, Scott, is when I was first accepted to Wigleaf, when I first got a story accepted to Wigleaf, I felt like I had made it. So thank you for that. You know? And thank you for all those years of Wigleaf. You know?
Yeah,
great magazine.
Very cool. All right. Well, let's bring Anjali back, and we're going to get everybody in on it. So I'm going to read you guys a passage from an Annie Dillard essay called Write Till You Drop. And it goes like this. A well-known writer got collared by a university student who asked, "Do you think I could be a writer?" "Well," the writer said, "I don't know. Do you like sentences?" The writer could see the student's amazement. Sentences? Do I like sentences? I'm 20 years old, and do I like sentences? If he had liked sentences, of course, he could begin like a joyful painter I knew. I asked him how he came to be a painter. He said, "I liked the smell of paint." I like the smell of paint. Question, looking back at your own developments as writers, how true does that ring for you? How important was the sentence itself to that process?
You know, I think that's one of those things where, again, I would say it's almost instinct. Like, I don't think I was sitting there as a teenager being like, that's an awesome sentence. But I do think I always reacted to, like, if there was a word I didn't know in a sentence, I wanted to know what that word was. If it meant some really specific thing that I had never heard of before, I was amazed by that. And my mother will talk about my grandmother who, you know, didn't go to college, like worked in a factory until she was married, and then, you know, and then was a stay-at-home mother. But loved to work crossword puzzles and would, like, if they were driving down the highway and passed a billboard with an interesting word on it, would be like, that's an interesting word. That I feel like she had that same instinct, even though it, you know, she never, as far as I know, wrote anything in her life. So I think just that fascination with the possibilities of language is there really early.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think before sentences, it was words for me. You know, I just absolutely loved words. I went crazy for them. You know, I just love the sound of them. You know, how they were. You know, I was big on spelling. You know, I used to love the spelling test. So I just figured out, you know, how they came together. And I think behind that is, you know, I think there's an acknowledgement, even though I wouldn't have put it into words like this, but there's an acknowledgement that, you know, these weird little arbitrary sounds that we put letters to or whatever, and they're able to have meaning and create meaning, and that's fascinating. You know, that still fascinates me, but I think that was the fascination there. How these, you know, these strange little, you know, imaginary things, essentially imaginary things, you know, they're metaphors, you know, symbols, are able to create meaning.
Yeah. So I thought about whether I could moderate this panel without referring to this essay, and I decided no. But it's a deep dive. It's kind of a deep dive. The writer Gabrielle Lutz, in her essay "The Sentence is a Lonely Place," sets a really high bar for the sentence. Each one that Lutz writes should offer, quote, "a community of sound." So I'm quoting a little further now. There needs to be an intimacy between the words, a togetherness that has nothing to do with grammar or syntax, but instead has to do with the very shapes and sounds, the forms and contours of the gathered words. So this essay is a fascinating rabbit hole. And I have to say, it delights me to see Lutz play through like that perspective in discussing writers whose work she admires. At the same time, it seems kind of overwhelming. And I can sort of see why Lutz's own stories rarely pass the 5-page mark. So my question is, is what's best for the single sentence always what's best for the fiction as a whole? Or is it possible for those two values to be somewhat at odds, inharmonious? You can go anywhere with that.
I think they are at odds sometimes. There's certainly sentences that I love because they sound beautiful, but really they're not moving the story forward in any way. But I have to say, as a reader, I am just a sucker for a beautiful sentence. I will forgive a lot of poor plotting and characters that I'm not that into if I really love the sound of the sentences. And I think that's like my personal slant as a reader, you know, like if someone else said to me, yeah, no, the sentences are beautiful, but that book was so slow, I would probably agree and say, yeah, it was slow, but I kind of didn't care because I was so interested in the sentences. But I don't expect that everyone will have that reaction. But, you know, for instance, Rion, when you were reading your story and I was listening with my eyes closed, right? And you have so many lines that would scan as a line of poetry, right? Or there's an internal rhyme in the sentence. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know if you're sitting there consciously thinking about that as you're revising, but it's in, you know, 3/4 of those sentences I felt like had just a perfect scan to them.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I'm a failed poet myself, you know, and yeah, you know, I do think of the rhythm a lot of times. A lot of times I'm counting syllables, and yeah, you know, I you know that there's that line where it's like street buskers, hustlers. You know, that there was, you know, that probably started off as a mistake, you know, and then I was like, yeah, that sounds good. I'm gonna keep that. You know, so yeah. I try to have as few utilitarian sentences as possible. You know, sometimes you need that sentence that's just going to get you from point A to point B. You know, there's no way around it. But I try to have as few of those as possible. You know, I want to. You know, I want to dazzle. You know, I think it's fun. It's fun. You know, for that. You know, and I think, you know, with that part of it. I think that came in very late. You know, there's a version of that story without that intro. Just because I didn't have the ability to do that. And once I developed that ability, it was like, oh man, look what I can do. You know, and you know that's a section that I'm particularly proud of. I was reading it. I was like, wow, I did this. You know, but I do think it's possible to go overboard. You know, with sentences where you just have, you know, this pretty little thing that does nothing, and you do have to balance that with other elements, and writers like us who love sentences, you know, we have to guard against that. That Lutz essay is awesome. You know, I had my students read it at the beginning of the semester, and it's so cute watching them, you know, trying to follow everything and do everything that he says in that essay.
I do that too. So, kind of a follow-up question. Randall Jarrell has this famous definition of a novel. Y'all probably heard it. A novel is a prose narrative of some length that has something wrong with it. Mm-hmm. So we may have this idea with novels that things could be like looser, less perfect maybe than in the case of a short story, where because of their brevity, maybe the amazingness could be like sustained. I'm wondering if this makes any sense to you in terms of sentences. Do sentences factor in this way? Do the sentences have to be like better in stories than in novels? Does the bar come down maybe for novels? I wonder if you had any thoughts there.
I mean, I'm working on my first novel now, so I don't consider myself any expert on it. I will say that part of what I'm finding difficult about writing it is that in order to make any progress, I have to just do some really ugly writing. Like, I keep looking at this book and saying, this book is so ugly. It's hard for me to tolerate the ugliness of it right now. And I know that I'm going to get to the point where I'm revising it and I'm going to get to put the beautiful sentences into it. But with a story, that period of ugliness is much shorter, right? That first draft where I'm just having to slap it down on the page is a much shorter duration of time. Yeah. And so I can more quickly get onto the part where I'm crafting sentences, which is my favorite part.
Yeah.
And also I do think every sentence in a short story just has to do more work than every sentence of a novel, because you have to sneak in so much information while building your characters and everything else. So I do think there's that more distilled quality to the sentences in a story.
Yeah, you know, in a short story, the way I think of it is that you can't have too many false notes. You know, you might, and it depends on where the false note is. A false note at the end, you killed your story. Yeah. You know, and you know, you could have maybe like a couple of false notes, but then then you don't really have a story. If it's Flash, you don't have any. You can't have any false notes. You know, but a novel, because there's more space to it, there's more length. I can't think of a novel that doesn't have horrible moments. Even like Invisible Man or Huckleberry Finn, there are moments that are just like, okay, Ralph, okay, Mark, but they still hold up. So yeah, so I love that. I love that humorous definition of a novel, because yeah, it's it's an acknowledgement that if you have 300 to 500 pages, every single sentence is not going to work. There might be whole chapters that don't work.
Yeah,
you might have an ending that doesn't work and still be good.
Right. So we're into this discussion. We're thinking a little about better sentences or unbetter sentences. It seems like maybe a good moment to slow down and ask something basic. What for you makes a sentence good? Like, what are the kind of qualities that come to be there? What kind of things might come together to give you that feeling when you're writing of like tingly fingers?
For me, it's a lot of it is rhythm and sound, right? I'll be reading student work and I'll get to a sentence that was really great, and I'll say, in my head, I'm saying, but it would have been so much better if this last word had 2 syllables instead of 1.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to, Anjali might have got disconnected there. I'm going to take this moment to remind people that you can post your questions at any time, and we will be getting to those questions. So don't forget to post those questions.
Sorry about
Rian, that. Oh, yeah. Rian, did you want to jump in on that, or?
Yeah. I think what makes it, sometimes it's hard to put your finger on it, So, a lot of times it's the feeling you read the sentences and it gives you chills, So I know a sentence is good when I'm just like, oh, but yeah, I think it and a lot of times, if I get that feeling, I don't want to break it down, because it's just like, it's like revealing how the magician did the trick. So, but yeah, it is a lot of sound and rhythm. I think of Alice Walker's The Flowers. Very short story. I think probably less than 500 words. And there's so much materiality to the sentences. She does I think she hits all the senses. There's the sound, smell, taste. It's all there. And I think that that makes the sentences pop in that particular story.
Yeah. So my next question, Anjali already spoke to it just a little bit, so maybe I could guess what your answer will be. We'll see. You sometimes hear writers encouraging other writers to relax while drafting. Try not to care so much about whether what they do is any good. Mm-hmm. By this perspective, it might be said that the artistry of the sentence, whatever that is maybe more likely to be a product of revision. How true is that for you in your case? That it's really revision where the best stuff happens. I don't know.
Yeah, it's very true for me. I mean, I really don't like writing first drafts. I find them kind of torturous to write. But I love, love, love the revision, which is handy because it takes a lot longer to do the revision usually than it does to write the first draft. So yeah, I definitely think that's where a lot of it comes in. But I do think I am always cautious of putting something down on the page that really sounds really wrong. Partly it bothers me, but also sometimes it does tend to sort of ossify, and then it's harder to change than you think it would be.
It can take you in the wrong direction.
Yeah, it just somehow gets into your head that that's the way the story goes. And even though you know you can change anything, sometimes it feels harder than other to make that change. So, you know, I do put effort into the first draft to try to make it sound beautiful and try to have things flow and whatever, but certainly it gets much better in revision.
Yeah, I totally agree with Anjali. I mean, I think that, you know, a lot of times you put that rough sentence in there, and it becomes part of the foundation of the story. You know, at least for me, everything flows from the last sentence. So, you know, a lot of times it's hard to go back and change. But I've stopped writing in drafts more or less. I sort of built in revision to the drafting process. You know, when I open the file, a lot of times I'll go back either to the beginning or to some point and you know, touch up the sentences as I go. You know, and that's been my process for a little while now. So I do, like, right now I'm writing a story, and it's sort of bothering me that you know, the writing is not up to the level of some of my other stuff, you know, without, you know, just being hard on myself. And, you know, we should stop being hard on ourselves, you know, because all the other stuff has been worked over for years. So, you know, but you know, you do want to try to get as close as possible as you can to something, you know, something beautiful.
Yeah. So Grace Paley, in her Paris Review interview, Grace Paley had this to say, and this is good stuff. A lot of my stories begin with a sentence. They all begin with language. It sounds dopey to say that, but it's true. Very often one sentence is absolutely resonant. A story can begin with someone speaking. I was popular in certain circles, for example. An aunt of mine said that, and it hung around in my head for a long time. Eventually I wrote a story, Goodbye and Good Luck. It began with that line, though it had nothing to do with my aunt. Another example, she says, there were two husbands disappointed by eggs, which is the first sentence of The Used Boy Raises. I was at a house of a friend of mine 35 years ago, and there were her two husbands complaining about eggs. It was just right. So I went home and began the story, though I didn't finish it for months. I'm almost invariably stuck after one page or one paragraph, at which point I have to begin thinking about what the story could possibly be about. I begin by writing paragraphs that don't have an immediate relation to a plot. The sound of the story comes first, she said. This, I mean, to me is just so interesting. And I wanted to ask you, for you, how close are sentence and sound to the actual genesis of the fictions you write?
For me, I have to say it is I much more often start with an image or a place rather than a sentence. A lot of my stories have some sort of nature component to them, or some landscape that is a big part of the story. And it's usually, sometimes it's an imagined place, but often it's a real place I've been to that impacted me in some way. So that's often my starting point, more so than a sentence, which is interesting, I guess, because I am so obsessed with the sentences once they get going. But I will say, related to the language, the voice of the story, I think, is a really driving factor. And it's very hard to get past that first paragraph or page if I feel like the voice is not right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Things begin in different places for me, but I think some of my favorite stories, often do start with the sentence that is there and is set from the beginning, and then everything flows from that. David Sherman started with "God is from Cross River, everyone knows that," and that was there from the beginning, and I love that sentence. And I had that story when my first book. The story pretty much done when my first book was done. But I knew that I felt like it was going to overwhelm the rest of the book. So I held it. I was like, this is going to be for my second book. In my first book, there's a story called 202 Checkmates, and the first sentence is, in my 11th year, my father taught me defeat. Again, that came first. I had no idea what the father was defeating her in. I had no idea the gender. I just had, and then everything came later. Second sentence, oh, it's a girl. Oh, they're playing chess. And it becomes this process of discovery.
Yeah. Do you have rituals? Do you feel like there are better or worse places or times for you as a writer to hear the sentences and catch their wind? Or is that sort of part of your past more in development as a writer?
No, so when I'm revising, this kind of relates to this audience question that we haven't heard yet, but that I can see in the chat. When I'm revising, I like to print the whole story out, sit there and read it out loud. And if I can't, and when I'm doing a final draft, like when I went through all the stories for my collection, I want to read that story from beginning to end with no interruption. Like I'm not going to set it down to go get a drink. I don't want any noise in the background because I want to be able to hear it in its entirety. And when I did the book, I actually read through the whole book beginning to end. And it was the wildest thing. There was a simile in, I don't remember, the second story that was also in the sixth story or something. And I had written them years apart, and I would have never known that I used the exact same, figurative language in two stories, except my ear could remember it, even though my brain couldn't. So I definitely have that ritual of I like to do a read through as I'm revising.
Yeah. What was the question?
So like, if you have rituals as far as
that's right, rituals.
Yeah. Especially like if you're trying to write great sentences, maybe you feel like you can't just sit on a bus,
right.
Pandemic times and write like great sentences.
Yeah. In the middle of the night, no one's bothering me. Which gets so much harder as I get older. I remember as a kid, I could be up at 3 a.m. and 8 o'clock, I'm ready to go. Lately I've been making sure that I read certain things. I make sure that I'm reading a lot of books right now, more than advisable, for various reasons. But I have to make sure that I'm hitting certain targets before I write. I just want to get the language in me. The music is so important. I remember there was a time when I wasn't listening to music and I couldn't figure out why my sentences were so bent and so flat. And it's it's because I wasn't picking up the rhythm. So I made sure that I had music in my life every day. So it's there.
Yeah. So I've been waiting for this one. Waiting to ask this one. Very excited about it. Favorite sentence writers, prose stylists, who has been the most important to you? Who are your absolute faves? Name names, name books. Let's hear it.
Yeah.
Man, I mean, I love Anthony Doerr and Kevin Brockmeyer, both as just like sentence crafters. They both are also magic realists, so I think I'm drawn to them for that reason as well. But they both just have the most beautiful sentences. And I can also remember, and I still like his work, but I can remember being in college and just reading Salman Rushdie for the first time and being like, you can make a sentence do that? Oh, you can do that? That's amazing to me. You know, like I feel like he just takes sentences and just stretches them out like silly putty, and somehow they still have their structural integrity, and it's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, Edward P. Jones is just magical, man. Oh my God. You know, I think, you know, he does this thing where it's like he goes forward in time, backwards in time, around the world in time. You know, and he has you know, imagine time. You know, if he walked down the street, this would have happened. And it all works. You know, it's so elastic, and I don't even know if I would dare to try what he does with the sentence, but it's you know, it's magical to look at.
He's one of those writers you read. And for me, it's like he makes you want to write. He makes you want to be a writer.
Yes.
Good.
Yeah, I remember the title story in his second collection. I just remember this tingly feeling in my brain after I read it. like parts of my brain I hadn't used were now activated. It was crazy.
Yeah. So I'm gonna skip that one. That's just seeming too deep. Yeah. So as an editor, part of my work involves training interns as first readers for submissions, and I have these like PowerPoints, you know, that we do over a series of weeks, and I'm kind of like trying to you know, hip them to stuff, that choices that writers can make that at least for us are sort of they aren't going to work very well. They're infelicitous, you could say. And so I go through all these things, all these moves that writers can make that probably for us, this is not going to be perfect. You know, I'm not saying for other people it wouldn't work, but for us, probably no. And then I get to the end of that particular presentation and it's like, but oh wait, sentences. If a writer's sentences are good, all that stuff we just said, they could pretty much get away with it. If the sentences are just like really, really tight and really, really working together in beautiful ways, they can get away with almost anything, at least for a little while. This is to say sentences are super, super important to a writer's chances, the success that they might have, right? So I'm thinking about how you are both teachers of writing, fiction writing, you know, given how important sentences can be to a writer's potential success. Is this something that you focus on teaching? And if so, like, do you think you can teach it? Like, what do you do? How do you try to teach sentences?
I do try to teach it. I do think it's the most difficult thing to teach. I mean, I think if somebody comes into class with no, you know, and their writing is full of sentences that are flat, you know, that just don't have any zing to them, or they're really based in cliche, or often what it is they're just using language really imprecisely. I never think you can't improve. I think anyone can improve. I think you can, through lots of hard work, you can do pretty much anything with your writing. But I think that is to me, it's the hardest thing to teach, right? It's much easier to say, this character is not compelling for this reason, and to make them more compelling, you could try A, B, or C. Mm-hmm. But with this sentence, I do think it's based on this long process of being a reader, being attuned to the language in the world around you. Mm-hmm. That's hard, but not impossible to teach.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That is, you know, a hard thing to focus on. One of the things I focus on is the verb. I think a lot of younger writers think of you know, poetics as abstraction, which is the opposite of it, you know, surprisingly. You know, and it's about, you know, so I talk about both two things: specificity and verb usage. and the stronger verbs are going to move the sentences, and and sometimes it can get comical, and sometimes I get comical in my drafts, replacing to be verbs, and sometimes you just let the to be verb ride, just let it ride, but so I think that, those two things can sort of be a gateway to a larger understanding of the sentence. I think they were for me.
Yep. So I'm wondering if we can get one more in before we're going to go to our audience questions. Let's try it. So in your recent collections, you both move beyond genre borders of conventional literary fiction. In fact, we got some science fiction going on in both collections, you might say. This gets me thinking, is it possible there are whole different worlds of great sentences? When we talk about the aesthetics of the sentence, is it something that could change or be influenced by genre?
Yeah, I mean, I think speculative fiction as a whole has this challenge of you have to situate the reader in the world that you're creating. And so this is kind of additional job that your sentences have to do. And the further that world is from reality, the more work the sentences have to do. And so you do get into situations where sometimes you do need just the utilitarian paragraph that says the aliens were like this and the planet was like this and whatever, but also I especially love reading the work of authors who, and seeing how authors do the reveal. So if I think of, there's a Octavia Butler story that I like to read with my students called Blood Child, where some of the characters are humans and some of the characters are basically giant insects. But she doesn't come right out and say that. And I love to kind of track how does she get that information in there before she does the overt reveal. That is really interesting to me in terms of technique on the sentence level.
Yeah, different genres have different conventions, and I think one of the reasons why I mess with genre and bring it into literary fiction is to try to see how those conventions collide with the conventions that I'm used to, that I've been trained in and taught. Yeah, but the thing is, a good sentence. I think that there are good sentences that you can recognize across genre. A good sentence is a good sentence, good plot is good plot.
I'm waiting to see if they come in. I'm gonna keep asking until they come in. A geeky sentence rhythm question now. Are you ready for a geeky sentence rhythm question? For you, I'll just read it like I wrote it. It'll probably work out better. Do sentence rhythms run through the period, shifting into each new sentence? Or is the space between the period and the beginning of a new sentence more like wiping the slate?
Seeing questions from the audience. I don't know if you're seeing them, Scott.
I think they're supposed to come back and
they're going to come back in.
Yeah.
Okay. So to me, yes, it definitely runs through, at least through the paragraph and sometimes through the whole page. I mean, sometimes the sentences are accelerating as you move through a paragraph. If you're trying to really give a particular energy to that paragraph, either, the rhythm or the length of the sentences, I do think that builds on the previous sentences and you get sort of a momentum to it as you go along. And again, I think that's something that I pick up on much more when I'm reading pieces aloud than I necessarily do when it's just on the page.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Because a sentence is it's a unit measure, and so but I think, of course, the sentence, the rhythm of one sentence is going to play with the rhythm of another sentence. That's why, varying your length does something, and it says something. So I think, of course, the sentence, the rhythm of one sentence is going to play with the rhythm of the next sentence. 'Cause you can do a lot with meaning, just by having your sentences, a certain length.
Mm-hmm. All right. Shall I ask you my other sentence rhythm question? I might as well. I was thinking about how sentence rhythms can sort of they don't always work the same way. There are things which might sort of affect how a sentence rhythms out, both in your head and when you speak it. And maybe high on that list for me would be voice, which Anjali, you mentioned already. But if you're working in a first person story, you've got a character, one of your characters in the story who's narrating it, who's telling it. And so there really is that factor simultaneous to the sentences being written, and it can kind of affect how the sentence reads, how the sentences read and sound. I wonder if I had a question there. I'm not sure if I have a question there. Do you have thoughts on this situation, like sentence writing in the first person? Any thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting because for a long time, I never wrote in first person. I always wrote in third person. I think partly because I was my starting point was kind of like the fairy tale tradition, where you're always in this really distant third person. But I did, when I started to move into first person, I think that was one of the things that was appealing to me, was being able to take on these different voices. It is still one of the things that for me personally, I find the most difficult. And I am always still really amazed when I read someone who's written a really great voicey piece, where I've read their other work and I know that the voice of this character is not the author's voice. Like when I read Faulkner, I love Faulkner, but I feel like even when he does these really disparate voices, I always hear Faulkner coming through. Yeah, it's always still Faulkner, but some people write voices where I'm, if I didn't have the author's name on it, I would have no idea who was creating this voice. That's really amazing to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that I think that the challenge is trying to figure out the to me it's always the challenge is trying to figure out the voice, it may take a little while to play around with it, you're gonna. I think like you read George Saunders. There's different sentences for different types of voices. And he'll do crazy things like dropping out the verb or whatever, and that's how he's building the voice.
I was so interested in some of your first person narrators in your new collection. There, a lot of them are sort of really. They're kind of troubled people, and they're very much trying to sort of understand their worlds and make stable their worlds with words in a way. Or at least that's one way to sort of hear them. So it's real interesting for me to think about how sentences interface with first person character in some of your stories.
Yeah, I think it's like a good definition of me. The troubled person trying to figure out things with words.
Hey guys, I'm joining in to ask some of the audience questions, and I think we have time for 3 or 4 or maybe even 5 of those before we wrap up. So, and then one of them will receive copies of the books. So Peggy O'Connor asks, Have either of you tried writing in another author's style just to try it out or just for fun?
Yeah, I've tried that. Actually, it's funny. It is one of the first writing exercises I remember doing as a student, and I remember really enjoying it. I will still try that sometimes, although I will say I have sometimes the opposite problem where if I'm reading a book by an author who has a really distinctive style, I have to take a break before I sit down to write, or that voice kind of bleeds over into my own writing unintentionally because it's just so much in my head. But I have tried it. I think it's a great exercise to get you to think about how word choice and rhythm and sentence length and whatever affect the sound of a piece.
What about you, Rian?
Yeah, I think it's a great exercise, and I think it's an important exercise for any writer to try it. At the learning, not learning level, we're all learning, but at the earlier stages. In my first book, I did a lot of that. There's one story that's actually a rewrite of an Ernest Hemingway story. The Slapsmith is a remake of The Battler. In my first book, I wanted to get done. I was just so tired of not having a book, and there were a bunch of stories that were in idea form or in draft form that I knew were above my station as a writer. They were above my skill level. So it was either wait a couple years till I got better, until I read enough and got better and wrote enough. But I was patient. The other thing was to try to try to use authors as models, and I borrowed August Wilson as a model for stories. I borrowed Edward P. Jones as a model for other stories, and in that way I was able to finish those stories.
Jennifer Rosner asks, are there poets that you go to for inspiration regarding your sentences?
For me, I would say I don't go to poetry specifically to try to help me craft a sentence, but I like to read poetry to be able to just immerse myself in language in a different way. And I think poets are so amazing. Like what I'm talking about with distilling sentences for a short story versus a novel, but they have to do that 10 times, 100 times more, right? Every word has to just really hit. Plenty of poets that I love. One of my favorite books of recent years was Cameron Barnett's Drowning Boy's Guide to Water. I just like the images and I don't know, but yes, mostly when I'm going to poetry, it is because I want to see language actually working in a different way than the way that I'm going to use it.
Yeah, I don't know about specific poets. I do think I guess there are specific poets. I just went back to Neruda because it was helping me with. The hope was that it was helping me write something that I'm working on. Walcott I go back to sometimes, but I think it's just poetry in general. As Anjali said, I had a professor when I was in grad school. I came to him. I said, my writing, I feel like my writing is stiff, it's stale, and I don't know what to do. And he said, you read a poem every day. And that's what I've been doing ever since. And he said it will make your writing more fluid, and he's right. It does. It gets down into your bones, And I think I think that's like a hidden secret to anything that I do. Is that every single day I'm reading a poem.
Great. Caitlin Bailey asks, how important is the first sentence or lead to keep readers wanting to continue reading? I want to sort of expand on that question, but by asking, how much do you think about, as you lay the sentences out, keeping the attention of the reader and sustaining them from one sentence to the next?
I do think it's really important with the first sentence, but I will say, as I'm writing the story as a whole, I'm not so much thinking of it in terms of, am I keeping the reader's attention, as I'm really working for cohesion in the story. I love it in a story when something is placed in the first paragraph and you don't really you're not going to really get the full weight of it until the last paragraph or until the 5th page or whatever. I mean, I feel like a well-written story is so dense in terms of the interconnections between sentences in various parts of the story. So I would say I'm more, yes, I want it to be interesting and I want the reader to be excited, and all those things are on my mind, but largely I'm thinking about how do I create connections between different parts of the story.
Yeah, I want the reader to have fun on the page. So I try to have some sort of excitement. Some sort, there are a lot of things, a lot of playful things hidden within my sentences. So and for me, every sentence flows from the last sentence. So the first sentence is incredibly important. So yeah, like I said earlier, some of my favorite stories, they came to me easiest. It came to me easiest because they had a great first sentence. And a great first sentence occurred to me.
Great. Gloria Redding asks, did you have a middle school teacher who inspired you? And then guess what? She was a middle school teacher in language arts. So she wants to know.
Gloria, I had an elementary school teacher who inspired me. In the 3rd grade, Mr. Feigert made us write 3-word stories every week, which now, back then I was like, yeah, this is an assignment. But now I feel like that's a lot, 300-word story every week. But I'm right. I'm really grateful for it. I'm really grateful for it. It definitely set the tone for my entire writing life, where they were due on Monday and I would always be at the dining room table weeping on Sunday night because I had procrastinated and now I had to finish this story that night. But I wrote actual stories with a beginning, middle, and end every week, which, was a gift to be made to do that.
Yeah, that's a real high bar.
I know.
I barely even make my grad students do stuff like that. Middle school, man, I was such a handful in middle school. I don't think I have a middle school teacher who inspired me. I mean, I'm sure I had great teachers who did a great job. I had a teacher in high school who assigned both night and Sula, and if I remember correctly, in the same semester. And those books, especially Sula, Night by Eli Wiesel, those books are foundational to me. And I mean, I recognized that I was reading great books when I was reading them. I was just so excited but I don't think I realized how great it was, how special it was to read those books as a 16-year-old or however old I was.
This last question comes from JLC Myers, and it has to do with dialogue. What techniques help you create a distinctive voice in each character?
Yeah, I mean, that one I really do feel like, even though this is the exercise that every writing teacher uses, but to go out and listen to people talking, which is hard to do these days, I think is your best starting point. I mean, good dialogue typically, I think, does not sound exactly like our everyday speech. If you have ever heard, there are a few films and whatever that use that really hyper realistic dialogue, and it sounds really odd and stuttering because we're not used to that. We're used to dialogue that's a little polished up from actual conversation. But but as a starting point to hear the different ways that people use language, I think it's indispensable to just develop an ear for the broadest variety of voices that you can. And I will say one of my most interesting experiences in that regard was I lived in Ireland briefly, and I lived in a small town where we really didn't get tourists. And at some point, 3 months into my stay, I was in a bar, and the person in the booth behind me was talking, and I was thinking, what is wrong with that person's voice? And I realized they just were American, and they were talking through their nose, because that's what we do. We talk through our noses in America, and I can't hear it now, but after living somewhere else for 3 months, I could hear it like that. So I just try to hear as many different voices as you can, I think is the best starting point.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I was recently reading an interview with August Wilson. He was talking about how bad he was at writing dialogue, and I almost had a heart attack because I was like, this guy is like one of the best dialogue writers ever. And he said, he'd started trying to write plays and he couldn't figure out how to do it, and he gave up for a while. And then when he went to a diner and started listening to people in the diner, that's how he understood it. And that made so much sense to me. And I do that, but also I think it's a lot about knowing the characters. I feel like if I understand the character, I'll understand how they talk, and how they talk will be different than the other characters, and it becomes intuitive as you go on. So when it sounds flat, when the language is flat on the page, it's often because I don't know the character.
All right, let's bring in Scott for the group hug at the end here. Thank you, Rian. Thank you, Anjali. Thank you, Scott, for this wonderful event and evening of talking about sentences. Scott, do you want to say anything before I have our last words here? Or?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, excellent. So again, thanks to our evening sponsor, Skylark Bookshop. The winner of this evening's Q&A prize and soon-to-be recipient of the books The World Doesn't Require You and All the Names They Used for God is Peggy O'Connor. Congratulations, Peggy. You can write to mail@unboundbookfestival.com with your name and address, and they will send copies of these books to you. So again, that's mail@unboundbookfestival.com. On February 25th at 7 p.m., we'll be back with speculative fiction by writers of color about diverse futures, near and distant, utopian and dystopian alike, featuring Minsu Kang, Chinelo Onwuala, and Kathleen Alcala, moderated by Nisi Shaw. So please tune in for that next. And thank you once again to everybody for coming in and joining us for this broadcast.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming, and thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Hi, guys.